We're going to start with our very first role model, Simone Schürle. Simone Schürle, she studied industrial engineering at Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. During that, she had 2 stays abroad, one in New Zealand and one in Kyoto. In New Zealand, she did research on drug infusion, and in Kyoto on different types of nanosensors. After her stays, she came back to Europe and she actually went to ETH Zurich to did her PhD. Her PhD was in the design and the conception of micro and nano robots. And for that thesis, she got the ETH medal. After that, it was not enough. She went to the US and did a postdoc at MIT, being backed from 3 different institutions. After that, with just 32 years, she came back to Europe, back to ETH, started being a tenure track professor at ETH at the Department of Health, Science and Technology. She's very intrigued by ancient philosophers because they combine science and art. And she's also at the World Economic Forum, a fellow for the Global Future Council. She also founded already her first spin-off of ETH. A very warm welcome to Simone Schürle.
Oh, thank you very much for this very kind introduction, and it's an absolute honor to be here. And thank you and Siemens to give room and space for this event and for women to exchange and support each other. So wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, thank you. So Simone, we would like to hear a bit more about yourself, about your career. So when you graduated from high school, did you have particular vision what you wanted to do?
I actually did not know what I wanted to do. I was always very interested in the natural sciences, so I majored in math and physics, but I also had actually too many points to be counted in my final exams because I had the philosophy and biology and languages, and I wasn't sure, but I always, as a child, I started to build cars for my dolls, and so it was always the engineering and definitely the math and physics that was kind of my core. But when you're young and you don't know what's my talent, when you're kind of you have different diverse interests in trying to figure out, and it was a remarkable event for me actually when because I thought I might study physics because this was I felt this was burning, but then I was actually my physics teacher was. Well, I thought you need sometimes mentors. You need this little nudge of where you go. And it's just one story I shared with you before. But it's basically, I was point even with a male colleague. And there was the opportunity to then, the best would come to the Physical Society. And that would have been a member of the Physical Society. And she decided that she just saw my male colleague more in the physics than me, and decided for him to become a member of this Physical Society. So this was for me kind of a turning point of not studying physics back then. Because, and it's just one of these moments that had a huge impact. So I decided then to study industrial engineering because I felt, oh, it covers a lot, it's very broad, and then I can just cover everything and maybe figure out if physics is not the strength, if she doesn't see that in me, maybe I figure it then later out. What happened is that I then just took physics, so I just did my detour. I started to study industrial engineering. I missed the physics, it wasn't going deep enough, and then I just had additional, basically went to the physics department, did my courses there, and just added this to my studies.
Wow. So great that you still found your way there, even through a detour. Later on, were there some role models that encouraged you, hey, you can become a professor, hey, you have the potential? Was there somebody?
I mean, becoming a professor was never, that came very late. It's also not that I ever thought I would be capable of doing a PhD, or it's kind of this, and it's interesting, I think this is often common among women, this feeling of I'm not good enough, or so for me it was long, I didn't dare to think about a PhD, but it was really then this master thesis or it was actually a turning point in one of my orals exams in microsystems technology, where the professor was afterwards just asking, so what do you want to do? And I said, well, I don't know. He said, I think you should keep on going in microsystems technology and the physics, and I see strength in that. And so he enabled then me to go to Kyoto to do then this research in nanosensors, and that was basically a nudge I got, because I didn't see that I could do that. And when I came back, he said, so now what's next? I mean, you have to do a PhD. You can't just let this work just leave like that. I said, what, a PhD? But I'm not a real engineer. I'm an industrial engineer. And he said, how much more do you need to prove to yourself and others? Just go and do it. And and that made me then indeed decide to actually do a PhD, and I got this opportunity at ETH Zurich, where I continued on these nanosensors first, and then dived further into developing systems, electromagnetic systems, to control and maneuver tiny sensors that then become robots in that sense.
Super interesting. So when it comes to being a scientist, a researcher, a professor, every day you're confronted, you have to move the needle, you have to invent something that has not been invented. So how do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, that's kind of, I don't feel it that way, because I have too many ideas. I'm more like, I need to decide which one to follow and strategize for, you have to get some of the low-hanging fruits and get some of the work out, and you have the longer term plans. And so that I don't see much of a, what's next. It's rather really to learn, or for myself to figure out to which things should I say no, and the right strategy to pick to move forward. So
probably a good strategy just to say, I have lots of ideas, just keep going and prioritize.
Yeah.
And about your research, so it's all about those tiny robots. So what is your vision? What do you try to achieve with those nanorobots?
Yeah, maybe to give a bit context. So first it was all on basically how to design and build systems at a small scale. I was intrigued by when I, during my undergrad, actually learned then about different techniques from bottom up to top down approaches, and basically engineering on silica wafers. And then I moved, and I always had this kind of interest in medicine, and this application of basically moving some of the microsystem technology in medicine, and then even going smaller into the nanoscale. And so what now my lab is called a responsive biomedical systems lab. What it means, we are designing micro and nanoscale systems that can respond to disease signals, so environmental cues of a disease environment, as well as to external stimuli that we can control. So I work a lot with magnetic fields. That was also all of my PhD, as well as with ultrasound as external cues to then basically have control over these systems and communicate with them.
So you want to have robots that actually fight, for instance, cancer and improve quality of life?
The idea is that, you internalize these systems. So there are different ways. So right now, we work on intravenous injections or oral delivery or intra-articular injections, different ways of bringing actually these systems into the body, where they then roam to detect and treat disease in that sense.
And so how does it actually work? So there are those nanorobots. By the way, how big are they?
Well, so usual size is what works quite well to go through the body is between 100 to 200 nanometer. So when we think about your blood vessels, you come from centimeters down to several tens of micrometers. So the size of a red blood cell is about 8 micrometer. So thinking about the width of your hair, about 60 micrometers. So basically divided by 10, and then have a tiny system interacting with the cell, so that's then another 100 times smaller. But then, depending, and so how does it look like? I mean, some work of actually that I did during my postdoc at MIT that also is moving now, what we patented and also moved into to another company, so not my spin-off, but my PI there moved that into a company. It's basically, so think about you have a nano shell that is basically kind of your Trojan horse that has some molecular substrates in there, and these can measure some activity of a tumor. Or let's say you have a tumor. Let's start maybe from the beginning. You have a patient who was diagnosed with cancer, and you want to now figure out what's the right therapeutic route to take. And then usually you would take a biopsy, but then you're looking at that tissue. And we wanted to develop a sensor that can basically measure some activity of the tumor in vivo without even doing a biopsy. And so there are different molecular substrates that can measure such enzymatic activity. It was about certain enzymatic activity, but you cannot just inject these sensors into the blood, and you can also not just look in the blood for it because you have lots of noise. This signal is really coming only locally. You need to measure it locally at the tumor site. And so we designed basically a shell that encapsulated these substrates to measure this activity that was designed that it can accumulate at the tumor site. And then we activate it locally by alternating magnetic fields. The shell responds to it in a way that it basically opens up. The substrate interacts with the enzyme. And then, you wonder, how do I read now signal out? And so basically it shed then a little marker, and that marker was then even smaller than the initial Trojan horse that can then get secreted in the kidney, and we read it out in the urine with paper microfluidics, basically like using a pregnancy test. And this is the idea to move also some of the diagnostics to either, of course, with magnetic activation, you can't move this to the patient's home, but with such interventions, moving it basically for better therapeutic decision-making, disease therapeutic stratification and decision-making, and a step towards personalized medicine.
Wow, it sounds super simple, but it's so complicated and breakthrough. So when can we actually expect that on when can we take those nanorobots?
Some of the concept of the molecules of these molecular substrates, that and this activation technique we patented, and it's now in a company called Glimpse Bio, and they're in the first clinical trials. That actually just started about a month ago. So some of this might be sooner here than thought.
Wow, cool. And how do you produce those tiny nanorobots?
Yeah, so there are lots of different ways, but here it's basically chemical synthesis in a way. So we get, as a shell, we use lipids that form then liposomes, and lipids are also part of our cell membrane. So we, of course, work with materials that work well in the body, and it's basically a bunch of chemical reactions in a sense.
Cool. And if you think about long term, imagine 30, 40 years from now, you look back at your research. What is it that you think, wow, this is Simone, this is what my legacy I want to be?
As a legacy, I hope, I'm really excited about basically thinking about new concepts of how we can use nanomedicine and nanodiagnostics to improve, basically, to improve the state of healthcare, to come to more patient-centered or people-centered approaches, to be quicker in diagnosis, have other ways of basically wireless, non-obtrusive monitoring, and move forward to a more healthier life in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and cure probably cancer.
I think, with curing cancer, I think so that's why I'm also really excited about the diagnostics and kind of finding ways of easier ways of diagnosis, because we're at the point that if we detect cancer early enough, we are good in treating it. The problem is just we usually detect it too late, and we have amazing technology to detect smallest tumors with you can do a PET scan, but we can't do a PET scan every week. So moving towards kind of new ways of where you can do some tests maybe at home from time to time and just check on that everything is fine. That I hope to help.
Oh. Wow, super inspiring. Simone, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.